Now, just today's presentation, the Navy at Gallipoli. Um, Maybe a lot of our audience today have heard about the various aspects of the Navy's involvement in Gallipoli, but Noel has put together a fabulous presentation.
The presentation is dedicated to Tony Reid, actually. Was a retired Navy officer, and he was a volunteer speaker at the Maritime Museum with Ron, who's also on this session, and myself. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but every ANZAC day he got really annoyed. This is all about the Army. And then he'd go, who landed them, supplied food and ammunition, evacuated the wounded, finally evacuated tens of thousands without a casualty. Not a bloody word. It was the Navy. So he put together two presentations. Sailors on Horseback, which is the story of the Royal Australian Navy bridging train, and the AE story. I've used some of his presentation material, but expanded it to cover a lot more. Now, the presentation is over 200 slides. Most of them are photos. Some of them are Word documents, and don't bother even trying to read them. They're prompts for me. I'm 83 this year. I just need a bit of help to get through presentations out. It'll take over an hour, but the end there's a really interesting bit to the end, so please stay. This is the part of the world we're talking about. You can see it's the Black Sea connecting to the Aegean Sea, but there's countries like Ukraine and Russia are being connected out to the Mediterranean Sea. So it is an important part of the world and a very important sea lane. Here's a closer look at it, the Dardanelles with the Gallipoli Peninsula, and I've shaded in Suvla Bay, Anzac Cove, Cape Helles, where major landings were made, and the island of Lemnos, which was the staging post for a lot of this activity. So that gives you a bit of a picture of where we are in the world. The presentation is based on this book, First In, Last Out. Two people that probably know a lot more than I do about the Navy, Tom Prain and Greg Swindon. So I've used a lot of material from this book, and it's called First In, Last Out. Why is it called First In? The first into the Gallipoli on the Anzac Day was actually our own HMS AE2 submarine just after midnight. And last out was on the 20th of December, the Royal Australian Navy bridging train at 4:30 a.m. So we were first in and last out. So an overview, where we're going to have a look at World War I, the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy, the plan to breach the Dardanelles. There's two campaigns here, the Dardanelles campaign and the Gallipoli campaign. They're interlocked. What defences the Dardanelles had to stop ships going through there. The initial attacks, there were multiple attacks. We'll just look at the initial attack on the fort, which Churchill ordered, and then the massive final attack where 3 battleships were sunk. The Gallipoli campaign, when the Navy couldn't do it, the Army were asked to do it, and we'll look in detail at the role of AE2 submarine. AE2 changed the whole course of the Gallipoli campaign. The landings at Anzac Cove and Suvla. So we'll then look at what the bridging train did, the evacuation, how that was done at both Anzac Cove and Suvla Bay. And the interesting bit at the last is the first mutiny for the brand new Royal Australian Navy. So this is how it all starts out. The Western Front's a stalemate. Churchill, of course, is in charge of the Navy. He's the First Lord of the Admiralty, and he's extremely frustrated. He's got the largest Navy fleet in the world, and he wants to do something to help the war. So he comes up with the idea, well, why don't we capture Constantinople, take Turkey out of the war, and we can maybe open up another front to get the stalemate going. And of course, open the Dardanelles to ships. Why? Is they wanted to open the Dardanelles to ships to get arms to Russia, and also all the grain from Ukraine and Russia out to feed the world. So he's just itching to go into battle, and he comes up with ideas which the admirals don't want to take a risk. He proposes that the the Navy, the British Navy goes around and meets the Germans. They don't want to go there, submarines, mines. But finally, of course, the two navies do meet each other in the Battle of Jutland in 1916. Here's what young Churchill looks like at this point in time. Now, the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy. Well, the Royal Australian Navy became part of the Royal Navy under the control of the Admiral and Admiralty. And of course, they're scattered around the globe with the Royal Navy and providing escorting convoys. There were lots of firsts here of strategies and tactics through these whole two campaigns, and they're still used as a case study today in Navy and Army training. One of them is definitely don't do this, and the other is this is the way to do it, the evacuation. The Royal Navy and the Royal Navy are interchangeable. The ships are Navy, British ships, but there's no radar at this point in time, and there's little aerial reconnaissance. We'll see how the aerial reconnaissance was was done to look at the fall of shot and just do general reconnaissance. But the value of it was really seen in World War I, so it started the idea of aviation for the Navy. Here's how you launched a plane. You put a platform over your gun turret and gun barrels, and that's how the reconnaissance planes were launched. Here's another one off Sydney 1, and of course it didn't all go to plan. There were some accidents. So, well, what happened to the Royal Navy in World War I? Well, we started out with 16 ships, 3,800 men, and finished up with twice that number of ships. And one of the interesting things we did as part of the Royal Navy, we escorted the German High Seas Fleet to Scapa Flow, which is the main anchorage for the Royal Navy up in the Orkney Islands. And you probably recall this. The whole German Navy went in. They were pretty poorly treated there. Everyone, the victors were trying to divide up the spoils, and the Germans just got frustrated and scuttled 52 of their 74 ships. So here's what the German High Seas Fleet looks like. And here's Derflinger capsizing and sinking in Scapa Flow. And here's the Hindenburg going straight down with its superstructure above the water. So here's some key dates. February 28th, 1914, our submarines are commissioned in England. Then Britain does something really that harms relationships. Turkey has 2 Turkish battleships under construction in Britain, and Britain decides it would like those for this war. So it requisitions them, renames them, and refuses to give compensation to Turkey, which would have influenced relationships. Then on August, the Royal Australian Navy is passed over to the Admiralty. And then, of course, we've got a German base of German ships and German colonies above Australia and New Guinea. So we send nearly all of the Navy up there to get rid of the Germans, which is done in fairly quick order. But unfortunately, both of our submarines that went up there, AE1 is lost with all 35 crew, and it's discovered in 2018. We'll come to that. Then something happens in the Mediterranean which really changes things. The Royal Navy just allowed 2 German, one's a battleship, one's a cruiser, to escape. They escape and arrive at Constantinople. The Turks quickly close the Dardanelles once they're there to all other ships. And then the first bombardment starts in November in 1914. And our troops have just reached Egypt at this time. And of course, our first battle, first victory happens in November. Sydney 1 destroys Emden. We'll see some photos now of all this. This is what the Turkish battleship looked like. One of the 2 that Britain took. And here's our Australia 1 battle cruiser. It went up to New Guinea to get rid of the Germans, and the Germans promptly left. They didn't want to come into range of this ship. It's got 12-inch guns. They only had Sharnos and another ship, and they had 8-inch guns. So they decided they wouldn't go up against Australia 1. Here's the wreck found in 2018 of AE1 after 12 unsuccessful searches. You can see on the left-hand side, it's gone below its safe dive depth, and it's been imploded. The whole front section is crushed in. Here's what Emden looks like. On the left there, you can see a beach. It's been run aground to save the crew, blown to pieces by the gunfire from Sydney 1. Here's a photo of the German ship, Breslau, that made it to Constantinople. And here's German, the battleship that are now in Constantinople. And they've got an admiral, a German admiral there to organise all this. So what's the plan? Here's the plan. You can see the squares are forts at the beginning of the entry to the Dardanelles. There's lots of forts, and then it gets narrower, and there's lots of forts and minefields there. So the British know about the forts. It's well known. So Churchill says, well, can we, get through here, open this up to traffic and get to Constantinople? And Admiral Carden says, well, yeah, I think it's okay. It's low risk. And Churchill says, well, look, we've got a whole lot of pre-dreadnought battleships. They're due to be scrapped. We could use those. And rather than scrap them, let them go down fighting here. So they know about the forts, but they ignore. There was an assessment in 1907 which rated it as very high risk to do this. But it's really simple to do. The battleships have longer range than the guns in the forts. So you just come in with the battleships, destroy the forts. Then once the forts are destroyed, you have the minesweepers came in, remove the mines, and you're through to Constantinople. Sounds really simple, but the minesweepers are 32 North Sea fishing trawlers with a civilian crew. So that could be a bit of a risk doing this. Anyway, the admirals think this is all good, but they say, look, it really needs both a Navy and Army operation. But Kitchener says, look, I'm really busy on the Western Front with troops. You can't get any. So here's Admiral Carden having a large moustache, must have been the fashion of the day. Here's the sort of ships that were involved, really old designed ships. And here's the trawlers at work with the cable between two of them. This would be really risky work for people that are very quickly brought into action to do this. And they also tried picket boats doing minesweeping. Now, what the British didn't know was that there were mobile howitzers all along the sides of the Dardanelles. The howitzers, of course, can lob shots, and they're hidden behind earth banks, in ravines, etc. The guns from the ships are going to fire a flat trajectory. If they're raised, if they're elevated, they're going to go 10 miles or more. This is in a fairly narrow piece of water. And of course, the guns on a battleship are designed to hit another battleship or similar, and which is a very large item. The guns are a very small target. And the Turks have an interesting trick. Of course, when you fire a howitzer, there's a cloud of smoke as it's fired. So they set small parts of gunpowder all along the side and set that off. So the ships think there's a gun there, which there isn't. Then the Turks one night put in a new minefield parallel to the shore, which is unknown to the British ships. And they're not sure what's going to happen. Will the German ships come out to enter battle? Will Constantinople surrender when the fleet gets there? And if it does get there, how in the hell are we going to supply it while it stays there? How hard will the army fight? There was a thought the Turkish army would be similar to the Italians, not too good in a hard battle. And the admiral said, well, we'll withdraw if Churchill says, we'll withdraw if necessary. And the admiral say, absolutely no bloody way we're going to withdraw in front of the Muslims in all these countries, just not very British. The defences. Well, in 1914, the Turks are really not up to much here. They're obsolete guns that they've got. They've got the howitzers, searchlights, etc., and the troops are not trained. So they're not ready for any action here in 1914. So this is the sort of guns they had, quite old guns, short range. But in 1915, after the attempt on the forts, they now upgraded. And of course, with a lot of German help, they've now got lots of mines, but they're still short on ammunition. And they add more howitzers behind the banks. So this is what it looks like. That's the minefield here that I've circled. That's the key thing here. The ships are going to come in here. They're going to get hit by the howitzers. And then they're going to do is turn to starboard and straight into this minefield. And that's where the three battleships get sunk. So this is what the forts look like. I'll just show you quickly some photos. And later on, you'll see in the presentation, Nelson made a lot of notes. And one of the notes says, look, any ship that attacks, anyone that attacks a fort is a fool. So here's the bigger guns that are now in place in 2015. And seeing as they're having a bit of difficulty, they decided to put Marines ashore. And of course, that didn't work. Marines attacking a fort. More photos of the fort, just to give you some idea, built a long time ago. Well, we had Simpson and the Donkey in World War One. This is the Turkish hero. The equipment that conveyed this huge shell, 250 kilogram shell, from the magazine to the gun has been destroyed. So this particular guy says, no problem, I can carry that up to the gun. I mean, how he carried that in that way, that heavy, is beyond me. But he continued to provide ammunition to the gun. Here's what a howitzer looks like. It can be elevated right up and lob shots. And this is what the Turkish mine layer that went out at night to lay that extra, the extra line of mines. This is what the mines look like. So we'll just look, there were multiple attacks. We'll just look at the first attack and the main attack. So it's November 1914, war's not declared. And Churchill says, well, let's just show His Majesty is displeasure at this waterway being closed. So let's just line up a couple of British and French battleships, and we'll just see what happens. Give them a short bombardment, and they do some damage, but it's a huge mistake. They're alarming the Turks, and the Turks, well, we need better defences if those battleships can do this sort of damage. And the Turks are now on alert to a possible invasion. All right, now in December 1914 we've got the British submarine, and Holbrook's awarded a VC for this. I'll jump to the bottom. We had a town in New South Wales called Germantown, and of course it's not an appropriate name for a town, seeing as we're at war with Germany. So it's renamed Holbrook. If you've been there, you'll see part of us over on the submarine there. So a lot of money gets handed out here for getting through and sinking a ship. This is how he did it. You can imagine going through and the chains and horses, the steel rope that holds these mines, dragging against the submarine. Very dangerous stuff. And this is the ship that they managed to sink. So roll forward a bit. In January 1915, the War Council says, well, let's force the Dardanelles. Fisher's not in agreement. But then when the Admiralty says, let's do it, Fisher remains silent. So goodness knows what he thought at this point in time. So I've explained the gunfire has limited effect. You can't hit the howitzers. And then, as I mentioned before, any sailor who attacks a fort is a fool in amongst Nelson's notes. And we've got a new admiral in charge of the Navy here, Admiral de Robeck. All right, this is what the Navy guns look like, of course. They're firing almost horizontally to attack the forts and the guns. This is what the Navy ships, you can see that. They're very old ships when you look at the design, the way the guns are. A more modern ship was from the Royal Navy was involved, HMS Aristobal. So the final attack, the ships were one the forts, and they turn into this the number 11 minefield. 3 battleships are sunk, and of course the attacks aborted with that loss of ships and lives. So here's what's happened. The 3 rows of battleships come in. They get hit by the howitzers. They're trying to destroy. You can see where all the howitzers there are now. There's a lot of them. So Irresistible, Ocean and Bouvet are sunk here, and 3 more are badly damaged. Huge loss of hundreds of men. This is what the British ships were flying, French ships. And just to illustrate to you what they endured from the fire, here's a couple of photographs of the shells they were copying trying to do this. So that was just a bit too hot, so they would turn around and straight into a minefield. Queen Elizabeth was there, King George V type battleship, if I remember. And here it is firing its guns in the campaign. Lots of black smoke. Let's try and remember. Oh, here's Bouvet. That was Bouvet before. Here it is, capsizing and sinking. And here it is, the final stage going down. Here's Irresistible before it sinks. They managed to get a lot of the crew off, abandoned. And then the Navy tries bringing some destroyers in and using them as minesweepers, but the same thing. The minesweepers can't clear the mines, the battleships can't destroy the forts, etc. So the Navy say, look, we don't want to keep doing this. It's too dangerous. We've lost enough. So the Admiral is informed, look, we need a joint expedition now. Kitcher can make the troops available, but they're not going to be available to mid-April. Churchill, of course, is absolutely furious. And now the Turks have lots of time to increase their defences. The Gallipoli campaign, well, there's a lot of brass involved here. Hamilton's in overall charge, Kitchener for the Army, the Roebuck Navy, Birdwood for the ANZACS, and of course, Winston's still running a show. Just have a look at Hamilton's medals, various uniforms of the key guys. And here's the 2 really important people at the end of it. Now, Commodore Keyes was a lot, he was prepared to take bigger risks than anyone else. He's the commander of the submarines involved. There were lots of submarines involved in this, and he really wants to get things going. So back here where the area is, there's the forts at the entrance, and this is very narrow here. And Lemnos and Mudros is where a lot of the preparations are going to take place. Just to give you an idea, this is what it looks like, a very important seaway from satellite picture. So this whole stretch of water is 61 kilometres long, but it's quite narrow at the narrows. And the most interesting thing is the Black Sea drains itself into the Mediterranean. There's a surface current of something like 4 knots, but you just can't drain the sea. So there's an undercurrent in the opposite direction. This is going to be really tricky for a submarine. Just a little bit of history. At this point in time, Turkey's part of the Ottoman Empire, becomes a republic in 23, NATO in 1952. And you can imagine today it's closed to all warships, and there's getting the grain and oil in and out is a bit of an issue. So how many people were in total involved? Huge number, nearly 500,000, made up of 50,000 Australians, and the Ottoman Empire, not quite as many, but this huge. If you look at Australia, 8,700 wounded. the killed and 18,000 wounded. New Zealand, similar proportion of number. They weren't there all at one time. That was troops were rotated, but they were the numbers involved. So at the end of all this, Hamilton's career is over, and Churchill has to resign. The landings, well, this is where major landings took place. And I won't go into a lot of detail here. Just look at the numbers, though. Pre-draught battleships, 25. Submarines, 8 plus AE2, etc. God knows how many picket boats and lifeboats to transfer the ships. So this is just to protect the 138 troop ships, transports, and hospital ships. In total, you're talking more than 250 ships to land these troops. This is what it looked like on a Navy ship, staging point. And the picket boats, you can see the chimney is down. Here's the chimney put up. It's in the water, steam picket boat, ready to go. And of course, it towed lifeboats or other boats into the shore, and then the soldiers would row the last bit of the way. Here's a painting, which you've probably seen before, what it was like at Anzac Cove. And a photo just to show you the stores and the hills in the immediate vicinity. This is how a lot of the equipment got on shore. A lot of horses involved, a lot of wagons and artillery pieces. There were tugs there to do all this. And they even came up with the idea of run a ship aground. We'll cut holes in the side of it. There'll be a stairway out. But unfortunately, where they ran it on ground was straight in front of a number of Turkish machine guns. So they were just cut to pieces as they tried to land. Not a good idea, as it turned out. This is how the wounded were evacuated. You can see there were some walking wounded, people able to stand to be evacuated, and also on stretchers. And of course, there are a number of hospital ships. Something interesting to know about a hospital ship here, there were 3 Olympic-class ships, Olympic itself, Titanic, and Britannic. Titanic went down in 1912. Britannic was under construction, and of course, it's not going to be completed as a passenger liner. It's going to be completed as a hospital ship. It hits a mine on the way here and sinks in a similar way to the Titanic. Here's our own Centaur ship, just to give you what a hospital ship looks like. White hull, green line of paint, and red crosses. So these were staged off where the landing took place. So let's now come to the thing that most people don't know about, the Royal Australian Navy bridging train. It's the most decorated Royal Australian Navy unit in World War I. So what's required in the Western Front, of course, is army engineers that can build bridges across rivers, etc. But they don't have enough of them. So Australia offers to build a bridging, will provide you with a bridging train. So let me go back. I think we jumped ahead here. No? So there's all of its horses and wagons. You can imagine they decided to use the Navy Reserve to do this. But of course, they're doing an Army engineer's job, so they wear an Army uniform. The guy that does all this, Bracegirdle, is exactly the right guy for the job. He just is somebody that can just deal with any problems. And it's formed in Melbourne and trained on the Domain. And they're bound for the Western Front, but they're offloaded in Egypt. They're required at Gallipoli. So here's what they look like, an unusual insignia. And a lot of them had never ridden a horse. They had to be trained in horsemanship. Here is the bridging train parading through Melbourne. You can see the horses dragging the wagons. The pontoons were built at Cockatoo Island. And they were there, of course, for winter, very very cold, as you can see from the way they're dressed. And here's Commander Bracegirdle. He finishes up, has an outstanding career to be Rear Admiral Sir Leighton Seymour Bracegirdle with a lot of medals. This is what it looked like in Melbourne, loading the horses. This is the ship they went on. Notice there are more horses than men on this ship. And unfortunately, a disease just went through the horses. Every day they were throwing horses overboard. When they got to Bombay, the situation was so bad they had to offload all the horses. So this is the insignia. This is a postcard that was used. You can see the anchor and the chain insignia for the bridging train. And these are the places where they worked: Suvla, El Arish, Gaza, Suez Canal, Sinai, and Gallipoli. Here they are. Of course, they had to get a lot of equipment across the Suez Canal. So there were bridges, pontoon bridges put across. So they were in charge of the opening and closing all of these pontoon bridges across the Suez Canal, building some bridges as well to help out. And they were also at El Arish, which is part of the Sinai campaign. All right, then they disbanded in July in 1917 after all of that work. So this is their invitation to the Free and Easy, the last event that they attended. And here's the memorial to them, the plaque at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. All right, so they arrive at Suvla Bay. They're not involved in Anzac Cove, the ANZACS. The British have landed at Suvla Bay in August. So their job is to create a dockland, piers, wharves to get all the supplies in. And surprise, they named their camp at the beach, Kangaroo Beach. They're not getting any input from the army or the navy, so it's just left up to themselves. And Bracegirdle, fortunately, is a guy that can just handle this. Well, it's obvious what we need to do. We need to build wharves and piers, but they're under constant attack from Turkish artillery. And water is absolutely critical for all these horses and men. And the ships start to bring it in their double bottoms. Navy ships have double bottoms, and you can put stuff in there. And they build all sorts of irrigation system to provide water to everyone. So they unloaded stores, managed the lighterage operations. The most damage they had to their jetties and that was the coxswains of bringing lighters in, and all they wanted to do was get in, unload, and get out. So they'd often come in fairly quickly and hit a wharf. So they erected all sorts of things, and only 4 were killed and 60 wounded during this whole time. This is what landing at Suvla Bay looked like. There's a plain here. It's totally different to Anzac Cove. And this is a man, Admiral Wemyss, who comes into the story later on. He really appreciates what the bridging train are doing. So here's a couple of photos. The next one, I think, is probably a better photo. This is the Suvla Plain, totally different. Just look at the number of horses. There's tens of thousands of troops here. And of course, to protect themselves from artillery fire, they build dugouts and load and load stores, build a railway line. It's down there, so shrapnel from exploding shells, what's on the train is going to be protected, apart from a direct hit. And they build all sorts of docks and wharves. I'll just show you some of the photos. You can see sandbags here, timber. They just used whatever material they had. And they even, if there was a ship burnt out or wrecked, they would use the hulk to tow it to make a breakwater. Another shot, be interesting to see how everything was transported. You can see the horses and wagons and the jetties. And they even moved a whole lot of stone and earth to make wharves. So this is an interesting shot. I'll jump ahead a little bit to how they did the evacuation. The evacuation was done at night, and during the day, they made everything look ordinary. This is the day before the evacuation, and during the day, they're actually hanging washing out. Look, everything's normal, but it wasn't normal at night. They slowly reduced the amount of firing, the amount of attack that was done at night until they did none. And the Turks were going, well, we can get a good night's sleep now. They're not doing anything. Well, they were doing something. They were evacuating all sorts of stuff. Here's a shell hit. You can see how close it is. Another artillery shell exploding. And well, the museum said to Jeff Barnes, who's a fellow volunteer, he's also a volunteer at the Navy Historical Society. Well, there's a lot of dioramas in Canberra, so he must have had a very tolerant wife, because he took over a room in his house for 8 months full time to build this, and the museum paid for the materials. Here he is. The only the reason for showing this particular photo is look at the scale, how small these all these figures are, and of course, if you're doing this, everyone else who does it is going to check out, oh, have you got the right cap on? Have you got the right boots? Are they in the right uniform? All the detail. So it's all of these figures are in different sizes to give you that feeling of distance and perspective. This is the first time an amphibious landing craft is used, flat bottom. Lots of things were invented here to do the job. So these are all just part of the diorama. Before I put this presentation together, the word crib meant to me was where a baby slept, but it's not so. They're used today. Here's a modern photo of cribs being used as a wharf. This is here's the railway being built. The amount of detail, just incredible. The shovels. This is the one I particularly like. Here's all the officers in charge up having an afternoon tea, and they, of course, live on the ships. They go out and are fed normal diet, while all the guys on land here are it's bully beef, hard biscuits, etc. Some idea of the stores. You can see corned beef on there. They're sitting in the sun. Apparently, when you opened it, it wasn't the best smell or the best sight to see. And a couple more back to the diorama. The donkeys carrying water cans. And there's always a positive, isn't there? Interesting to see how they went swimming. Keep your hat on. I'll go back to that one. The interesting thing is, of course, every time an artillery shell exploded, fish would be stunned or killed by the shrapnel. So there's always a positive. Instead of bully beef for dinner tonight, it'll be fish. And of course, there are a lot of mules there, and there are a lot of Indian sailors. Just another shot of just the immense detail of the diorama. All right, let's switch now to the role of the AE2, our second submarine. Here it is, a photo of it. It's quite a small submarine, but it is unique. At this point in time, it can fire torpedoes out its bow, out its stern, and it can also fire a torpedo out the starboard and out the port. So if it's got something it wants to attack, it doesn't have to maneuver too much to get to line up a shot. To give you some idea of the size, look at the relative size of the men and the submarine here. This is how it compares to Onslow, the Oberon class. It's significantly bigger, but the really interesting one to see is the submerged speed. The AE2 can only do 5 knots. The Oberon class can do 15 knots underwater, and of course, a modern nuclear submarine can do 30 plus knots, and it's only got 8 torpedoes. So this is what looks inside. That's the control room. This is the engine room. The noise and heat in here would have been just intolerable. They were towed to Australia part of the way. The mechanic of these engines are all open. You can see most of the moving parts. Not a great place to be. And the way they were launched was ropes and an axe to cut the ropes and launch it. And you didn't get to break a bottle of champagne, but you got to keep the axe. So this is what was inscribed on it for Mr. Wharton, who did the job. So the submarines were never designed for the distance. It's going to be towed by a British warship to Singapore. Then our Sydney one's going to tow it a lot of the rest of the way. And it's going to go straight into refit at Cockatoo Island. It's got lots of machinery issues. Then it goes back to the Mediterranean. Here are the two submarines in Cockatoo Island. And Commodore Keyes, remember, our man who's on the staff says, well, let's get into this, boys. Is it possible to get a sub through the Dardanelles? What the battleships couldn't do, can we do it? And everyone says yes. The first attempt is disastrous by a British submarine, E-15, and then Stoker, who's in charge of who's the commanding officer of AE2, says, look, I think I can do it. This is how I'm going to do it. And Keyes says, right, do it. So it's 35 miles of 60 kilometres. There's the current, and the sub can only do 5 knots. So if it's in this current, it's only going to get 1 knot, only gain 1 knot of speed. And the battery can only drive it for 5 hours. So you can't do it underwater. It's got to be done on majority on the surface, which of course is extremely dangerous. Searchlights can see you. You could hit a mine, and you could be under gunfire. So he sails at 1 o'clock, but it's on the 24th. Has to come back and get it repaired, but then sails at 1 o'clock on the 25th of April. He's dived and he's starting to do it. And as I mentioned before, to being in a submarine where it's scraping the cables of mines would just be nerve-wracking. So he doesn't have any maps of this, so he runs aground. These submarines were very difficult to control, but he gets very lucky. The guns, of course, are not set up to be depressed to hit something like this, and he manages to get it off, and then he's frightening ships off. Ships are starting to support the Turks and fire artillery onto the ANZACS, so he's doing a great job of this. And then at 2:20, Birdwood, who's in charge of the ANZAC, says, "Look, we need to abort this. This is the night of Anzac Day. This is just slaughter of the troops. The killing rate is just terrible. We need to withdraw them." Admiral Thursby says, "Look, it's going to take us 2 days to do that." The proposal is put to Hamilton, but he's indecisive. Let me think about this. So AE2 starts sinking ships in the Sea of Marmara, and what it does is it comes up every now and then. He's been asked to run amok and try to get the Turks to think there's a fleet of submarines in here. So he does that really well. And then at 9:45, he surfaces and signals the fleet that he's penetrated the Dardanelles. This changes the whole Anzac campaign. So Hamilton still hasn't made up his mind and replied to Birdwood, who's requesting the evacuation. And now Hamilton knows about the AE2, and his attitude was, well, if AE2 can do the impossible, the troops on Anzac Cove can also do the impossible. Just tell them the difficult business is over of landing. You just have to dig until you are safe. So that's how AE2 changed the whole campaign. So it does all sorts of things, but unfortunately, in World War One and in World War Two, a lot of the torpedoes were defective, so he managed to hit ships, but they didn't explode. And then he loses control of it. It surfaces out of control, and unfortunately, right near a Turkish gunboat, who promptly puts a shell through the engine room, so it can't submerge anymore. Fortunately, he gets the whole crew off, and then scuttles AE2. So most of them spend years in a prisoner of war camp. Here's the Turkish gunboat that put the shell through AE2. So what was important about it? Well, it was the first to get through. It was denying the Turks' ability to resupply their army by sea, and everything had to go a bit slower now without the Turkish Navy able to do that. And there was some easing the pressure on the ANZACS at Anzac Cove. So post-war, Stoker becomes takes up a very successful stage career, and of course, people are awarded awards, and one of them comes back and gets married in Australia. So the search for AE2, originally in 1990, but it's found in September 1998. It's now an asset of the museum. Some shots on the right-hand side there of what it looks like, and here's another shot of the submarine being explored. There's no plan to raise it. The evacuation. Well, we now decided to evacuate it. And as I mentioned, everything normal in daytime, but the whole thing happens at night. And the Cape Hellies, the British Cape Hellies, don't evacuate in December. It takes them January. And well, what did the Royal Australian Navy bridging train do? They built a lot more piers and wharfs out of sight of the Turks, and the Turks did nothing about that, and it was the most successful part of the campaign. So it all happened on 18th and 19th of December, and there were more than 100 vessels, all sorts of, once again, you had a huge fleet of ships to do this, and you probably know about the Australian self-firing gun, the drip rifle, and the only risks they really faced was weather, and maybe the Turks had figured out what was going on. Here it is, Australian invention. Two containers of water, one's dripping into the other. As soon as there's enough weight in the bottom one, it's going to pull the trigger on the rifle and fire it. Here it is what it looks like in place. And here's how the evacuation was done. Does that look particularly safe to you? All of that equipment and those guys on that barge being towed looks a bit risky to me. They wouldn't want a big sea. Another shot, this is all the evacuation, all of the troops being evacuated. And this is what they evacuated: 35,000 troops, 3,700 horses and mules, 1,600, but a lot was left behind. Here's the stores left behind, set on fire. And, the army built its certainly tradition at Gallipoli, but the Navy, remember, was modelled on the Royal Navy, and due to that, it already had a lot of tradition, some 400 years old. So Charles Bean, our historian, how did he describe the Anzac spirit, the spirit of the Anzacs at Gallipoli? Endurance, they could just put up with a whole lot without complaining. Courage, ingenuity, in particular the ingenuity and resourceful. If the standard way didn't work, they found a way to get the job done. Always a bit of a laugh, even in the most dangerous situations. Mateship and extreme loyalty. So once back to this postcard of all the places where the bridging train worked. Suez Canal, we've had a look at that. So they disbanded. They're offered to transfer to the army, return to Australia, or naval service or discharge when they return. So they have this free and easy final event. And sorry, I've doubled up on that. Here's Admiral Weiss. He becomes back into the story again. So they're evacuated to Mudros on the island of Lemnos. Nobody really wants to know about them. They're not part of the Navy. They're not recognised by either the Navy or the Army as an important part of it. And they're in tents and there's no pay. The Army are being paid and they're, of course, buying all the things that they missed. And one of the interesting comments was to walk down a street and to smell freshly cooked bread after 5 months or 7 months of hardtack. So these things were just fresh fruit, etc. And they have no money to buy it. But worst of all, their families are struggling. No pay is going to those. Bracegirdle, unfortunately, is in hospital. Lieutenant Bond is in charge. And, they're all asked to fall out one morning. 189 of the 300, approximately 300, refused to fall in. This is classed as a mutiny. They're all under arrest. Their weapons are taken. And Admiral Wemyss says to Bracegirdle, obviously, you need to look into this. This is a first Navy mutiny for our fledgling Navy. Bracegirdle investigates and goes back to Wemyss and says, look, the officers have done a really poor job here of dealing with the complaints of no pay. They just haven't done what they should have done. And by the way, the pay was available there. It was the left hand not knowing what the right hand was doing. So Admiral Wemyss gets all of the bridging train together, congratulates them on the outstanding work they've done, and then announces a washout. There's no such thing as a mutiny here. There is no record of a washout. Lieutenant Bond is transferred.
Noel, very many thanks. Yeah, wonderful presentation, lots of detail. One of Noel's early comments was Gallipoli, the campaign, the amphibious operation is used today. Certainly the US Marines use it as a scenario or test case. So it certainly is an important process. And I think it's considered the first combined forces amphibious landing where all three elements of the services were used. So it is a historic event. Well, Noel, thank you. Unless there's any more final questions. Thank you again. Lots of detail, and it's well told, and I think very much appreciated by everyone. So thank you.